Can you imagine living your entire life as a ghost in your own home, while your sister is crowned queen? For 26 years, I watched my parents lavish every drop of love, attention, and money on my sister, treating me like I was nothing but a permanent inconvenience. But the day I finally walked away, the world shattered in a way I never thought possible. Main story. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I always believed every family had a golden child and a scapegoat. I just didn't realize mine had taken it to an Olympic sport. My name is Natalie, and from the moment my sister, Madison, entered the world 2 years after me, it was clear she was their masterpiece, their sun, their moon, their everything. I, on the other hand, became the rough draft they wished they could crumple up and toss away. The favoritism wasn't subtle, it was a blaring siren. Madison got designer clothes and the latest toys, while I inherited worn-out hand-me-downs from a neighbor's daughter, often 2 sizes too small. When Madison expressed even a fleeting interest in piano, my parents immediately hired the best instructor in town. But when I, with a hopeful heart, asked for art classes, I was told money was tight. They suggested I make do with free coloring books from the dentist. Every single birthday, every Christmas morning, every family gathering became a stage for Madison's superiority. I'd watch her unwrap gift after expensive gift, shiny new electronics, trendy clothes, concert tickets. Meanwhile, my pile consisted of practical items like socks or school supplies. My parents, Linda and Robert, would literally beam with pride as Madison flawlessly performed her latest piano piece for relatives, soaking up every compliment. If I dared to show off my artwork, the subject would change so fast it was dizzying. School? Forget about it. Madison could bring home a B+ on a math test, and it was an excuse for an ice cream celebration. I could pull straight A's for an entire semester, and all I'd get was a distracted, "Good job, honey," as my mother helped Madison with her science project. The double standards were suffocating. Madison could blow past curfew, skip chores, talk back to our parents. No consequences. I, however, would be grounded for forgetting the trash or for simply speaking up when dinner conversations inevitably revolved around Madison's latest social drama or achievements. By high school, the pattern was so deeply etched that even teachers and family friends noticed. We even shared some of the same teachers, and the comparisons were direct and painful. I remember my Aunt Carol pulling me aside at a barbecue once, her face etched with concern, asking if everything was okay at home. I wanted to scream, to finally unleash all the injustice, but a misplaced sense of family loyalty kept my lips sealed. Who would believe parents could be so blatantly unfair to their own child? College offered a temporary escape, but even hundreds of miles away, the favoritism followed me through the phone lines. Every single conversation began and ended with updates about Madison's life, her achievements, her boyfriends, her social calendar. They'd begrudgingly ask about my studies before launching into another 20-minute monologue about how proud they were of Madison. When I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in graphic design, my parents came, but spent the entire reception gushing to other families about Madison's acceptance to law school. My moment of triumph became background noise, drowned out by their anticipation of her future glory. The real breaking point, the moment something irrevocably snapped inside me, came last spring during Madison's law school graduation. My parents flew across the country, rented a luxury hotel suite, and threw a massive celebration. Professional caterers, a hired photographer, custom decorations proclaiming "Congratulations, Madison," in elegant script. 3 months later, I received my master's degree in marketing with a perfect 4.0 GPA, all while working full-time to pay for it myself. My parents' response: a text message that read, "Congrats, honey," immediately followed by a full paragraph about Madison starting her second year of law school and her internship at a prestigious firm. The inequality wasn't just absurd, it was an open wound. When Madison decided to buy her first house, my parents offered to cover her down payment, co-sign her loan, and even chipped in for furniture. When I mentioned looking for my own place, My father casually suggested I find a roommate because real estate is expensive these days. Madison received a brand new BMW as a congratulations on the new job gift. I was still driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic I'd bought in college, with over 200,000 miles and a constant need for repairs. Asking my parents for help with a newer vehicle? Apparently, that was just unreasonable. Family dinners became exercises in sheer endurance. Every single conversation revolved around Madison's career, her boyfriend Derek, their vacation plans, her opinions on everything. I could sit there for hours, silent, watching my parents hang on her every word, treating her casual observations like profound wisdom. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure to hit subscribe. More unbelievable stories like this one are always coming. The final, absolute last straw detonated during Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. Madison arrived 2 hours late without even a phone call, forcing my mother to keep the entire meal warm, making everyone wait. When she finally swept in, my parents acted as if she'd bestowed a tremendous gift upon us with her May presence. During dinner, Madison announced that Derek had proposed during their weekend trip to Napa Valley. This was particularly significant, having just graduated from law school and landed her first corporate job. My parents exploded with excitement. Immediate wedding planning, venue discussions, my mother weeping happy tears, my father cracking open a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. In the midst of their chaotic celebration, I quietly mentioned that I'd received a significant promotion at my marketing firm and would be leading a major campaign for a Fortune 500 company. The room fell silent for approximately 3 seconds. Then my mother, without missing a beat, asked Madison about wedding dress shopping. Sitting at that dinner table, physically present yet completely invisible, I finally understood. Nothing I ever accomplished would matter to these people. I could cure cancer, win a Nobel Prize, discover life on Mars, and they would still find a way to make the conversation about Madison's latest manicure. The holiday weekend continued, utterly consumed by wedding planning. Budgets that exceeded my annual salary were debated. Guest lists included people who probably didn't know I existed. When I tried to contribute to conversations about flowers or music, my suggestions were politely dismissed or ignored. But when Madison expressed even a passing interest in a particular venue, my parents were on the phone instantly to schedule a tour. The message was deafeningly clear. My opinions were irrelevant. Her whims were commands. December brought Madison's elaborate engagement party, held at an upscale country club with over 150 guests. My parents spared no expense. Professional DJ, photo booth, custom cocktail napkins with their names. During the party, my father delivered a tearful speech about his perfect daughter, about her achievements, her kindness, her bright future. I stood in the back of the room, wondering if he could even name my college major without looking it up. The holidays solidified my decision. Watching them fawn over Madison while treating me like hired help during family gatherings made everything sickeningly obvious. I was the daughter they tolerated. She was the daughter they treasured. January of last year marked the beginning of my strategic withdrawal. I started by reducing phone calls from weekly to monthly, then eventually stopped calling altogether. When they occasionally reached out, my conversations were brief, surface level. I declined invitations to family dinners, citing work commitments or social plans. Initially, they barely noticed. Madison commanded all their attention anyway, buried in wedding planning. By March of last year, I had effectively gone no contact. They didn't seem to register my absence until Madison's wedding invitations needed addressing. Suddenly, my mother realized she hadn't spoken to me in weeks. The phone calls started. Voicemails from my mother asking about my address for the invitation, wondering why I hadn't returned calls, expressing concern about my absence. Her tone, though, suggested mild annoyance, like I was inconveniencing her by being unavailable. I didn't respond. I focused on building a life that didn't revolve around seeking approval from people who would never give it. I started dating someone wonderful named Jake, made new friendships, and pursued interests I'd neglected while constantly trying to compete for their attention. Spring brought wedding planning into high gear, and apparently, my parents needed me to participate in Madison's special day. My mother's messages became more frequent, slightly more desperate. She wanted me to be a bridesmaid, help plan the shower, contribute to wedding expenses. The irony was absolutely staggering. After years of excluding me from important moments and conversations, they suddenly expected me to drop everything and celebrate Madison's happiness, to pay for parties honoring the sister who had received every advantage while I got the scraps. I maintained my silence through the bridal shower, the bachelorette party, all the pre-wedding events. According to Aunt Carol, who kept me informed through occasional texts, my parents were starting to panic about my absence, but still couldn't grasp why I was being difficult. The wedding invitation arrived in my mailbox in April, addressed in my mother's careful handwriting. Inside, a formal invitation to Madison and Derek's June wedding at an exclusive vineyard, and a handwritten note from my mother asking me to call her immediately about being in the wedding party. I stayed at that invitation for hours, every single slight, every dismissal, every moment I'd been made to feel utterly worthless in my own family, flooding my mind. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of expecting me to celebrate Madison's happiness after decades of being treated like an afterthought. Instead of calling, I wrote a letter, days crafting it, ensuring every word conveyed exactly what I needed to say, with no room for misinterpretation. The letter detailed years of blatant favoritism, the profound psychological impact of being the forgotten daughter, and my unwavering decision to build a life without them. I mailed it, along with the returned wedding invitation, officially declining to attend. I explained that I wouldn't be attending the wedding or any future family events. I outlined specific, undeniable examples of their differential treatment, from childhood birthday parties to recent holiday gatherings. It concluded with my decision to go permanently no contact. Their behavior, I wrote, had caused irreparable damage. I deserved better than being an afterthought in my own family. I wished Madison happiness, but stated I would no longer participate in the charade of being a loving family. The response was swift and explosive. My phone rang constantly for 3 days straight. My mother left increasingly frantic voicemails, a roller coaster of confusion, anger, and desperate pleading. She demanded explanations, accused me of being selfish and dramatic, and threatened to show up at my apartment if I didn't call back. My father, who rarely called me under normal circumstances, left several messages expressing his disappointment in my immature behavior, claiming I was ruining Madison's special day and demanding I reconsider for the sake of family unity. But the most revealing messages came from Madison herself. She called, sobbing, not because she missed me or wanted to repair our relationship, but because my absence was causing drama during her wedding planning. She accused me of being jealous and trying to steal attention from her big day. Her voicemails perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with my family dynamic. Even my act of setting boundaries and protecting my mental health was somehow about her. She couldn't conceive of a world where my decisions weren't motivated by jealousy or attention-seeking. The calls escalated when I continued to ignore them. My mother, a master manipulator, recruited extended family members, painting me as the villain, abandoning family during an important time. Cousins and aunts received carefully edited versions of the story, portraying me as ungrateful and spiteful. My mother told my cousin Jennifer I was having a mental breakdown. She told my uncle Mike I was jealous of Madison's success. Each relative got a slightly different, calculated narrative designed to demonize me. What my mother hadn't anticipated was that some family members had their own memories. My cousin Jennifer later told me she'd always wondered why I seemed so quiet and withdrawn. Uncle Mike admitted he'd noticed the stark difference in how my parents spoke about us. The smear campaign backfired spectacularly when my grandmother, Grandma Rose, my father's mother, called my mother directly. Grandma Rose, sharp as a tack despite her 87 years, had received multiple calls about my breakdown and decided to investigate. She'd witnessed decades of family interactions, possessed the kind of observational skills that come with age and wisdom. She'd watched me grow up in Madison's shadow, seen the differential treatment, noticed my growing distance from my parents. When she called me, her voice was gentle but firm. She asked me to tell her what really happened. And for the first time in months, I broke my silence. I spent 2 hours on the phone, explaining the years of favoritism, the emotional neglect, the final incidents that led to my decision. My grandmother listened without interruption, occasionally making soft sounds of understanding or disapproval. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. Her words validated everything I'd experienced. She'd seen it all happening, but hadn't known how to intervene without causing family conflict. She even told me about conversations she'd had with my grandfather before he passed, where they discussed their concerns about how I was being treated. They'd worried about my self-esteem. Grandma Rose's support was unexpected and incredibly healing. She apologized for not speaking up sooner and told me she was proud of me for setting boundaries and protecting myself. She promised to stop the gossip campaign by telling other family members the truth. True to her word, my grandmother became my unlikely advocate. She called the relatives contacted by my mother, providing a more accurate picture. Her reputation for honesty and fairness gave her words significant weight. The revelation that multiple family members had noticed the favoritism but stayed silent was both validating and heartbreaking. It confirmed my perceptions had been accurate, while highlighting how many adults had failed to protect me from psychological harm. Aunt Carol was the only other family member who reached out with genuine concern. She admitted witnessing the favoritism and understood my decision. Her support validated feelings I'd questioned for decades, confirming the differential treatment had been as obvious to others as it felt to me. Carol shared specific memories I'd forgotten or dismissed. Madison's 8th birthday, where I helped set up and serve food while Madison played. Christmas mornings where the gift disparity was so obvious other adults exchanged uncomfortable glances. These concrete examples helped me finally trust my own memories. The most powerful validation came when Carol told me about a conversation she'd had with my mother years earlier. She gently suggested I might need more attention and support, pointing out my struggles with confidence. My mother had dismissed her concerns, claiming I was naturally independent and didn't need as much guidance as Madison. This revelation was particularly painful. My emotional needs had been recognized by others, but deliberately ignored by my parents. They chose to interpret my self-sufficiency as proof I didn't need their support, rather than recognizing it as a survival mechanism I'd developed in response to their neglect. Carol also shared insights into my parents' current state, helping me understand the desperation behind their contact attempts. My mother, Carol said, had been crying daily since receiving my letter, utterly unable to comprehend why I was being so dramatic about perceived slights from the past. My father oscillated between anger and confusion, alternately blaming me and wondering if they'd made mistakes. The most telling detail was that they'd started arguing with each other about responsibility. My mother blamed my father for being too work-focused. He accused her of being too soft with Madison and too harsh with me. Their marriage was apparently experiencing significant strain as they grappled with the consequences of their choices. Madison's reaction to their distress? Characteristically self-centered. Instead of using the crisis for self-reflection about her role, she was angry that her wedding planning was being disrupted by drama about me. She'd actually suggested they just ignore my letter and pretend nothing had happened. Her inability to comprehend that her lifetime of preferential treatment had psychological consequences for me was stunning, but not surprising. She'd grown up believing she deserved special treatment and couldn't imagine how advantages came at my expense. The idea that she might bear some responsibility for family dysfunction was completely foreign to her. The wedding planning became increasingly stressful for my parents as they tried to manage their emotional turmoil while maintaining appearances. Wedding vendors asking about family photos and seating arrangements forced them to confront the reality of my absence in practical ways that made the situation impossible to ignore. My mother, Carol reported, became obsessed with finding ways to get me to attend, suggesting everything from surprise visits to hiring a family counselor. Her desperation revealed how little she understood the depth of damage done over decades. The extended family drama also created unexpected consequences for Madison's wedding. Several relatives had started asking uncomfortable questions after learning about my absence. Some even suggested postponing the wedding until family issues could be resolved, which sent Madison into a panic about her perfect timeline being disrupted. These developments confirmed my decision to write the letter had been correct. The truth about our family dynamics was finally being exposed to people who had witnessed it for years but never openly acknowledged it. The carefully maintained facade of family happiness was cracking under scrutiny. My parents' attempts to control the narrative were failing because too many people had their own memories of our interactions. They couldn't rewrite history when multiple witnesses had seen the same patterns of favoritism and differential treatment playing out for decades. The stress of managing both the wedding and the family crisis was taking a toll on everyone. My mother had lost weight. My father was drinking more. Even Madison, despite her efforts to maintain her confident demeanor, was showing signs of strain. The irony wasn't lost on me. My absence was causing more disruption to their lives than my presence ever had. For years, I'd been the stable, predictable daughter who caused no problems. Now that I was gone, they were discovering how much emotional labor I'd been quietly providing to keep family relationships functional. Carol mentioned my parents had started talking about other childhood incidents with new awareness, questioning if situations had been handled fairly. This late developing consciousness was encouraging, but utterly insufficient to repair decades of damage or convince me to return to toxic dynamics. The wedding was still months away, but the foundation of their perfect family narrative had already crumbled. My absence had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths, creating exactly the kind of honest reckoning that had been needed for years. 2 weeks before the wedding, my parents showed up at my apartment building. The doorman called to announce their arrival, and I instructed him to tell them I wasn't available. They waited in the lobby for over an hour, hoping I'd change my mind. When waiting didn't work, my mother began sending lengthy text messages filled with guilt trips and manipulation. She claimed I was breaking her heart, destroying the family, and being cruel to Madison during the most important time of her life. The messages revealed their complete inability to understand the situation. They focused entirely on how my absence affected them and Madison, never acknowledging the years of harm they'd caused me. Their concern was about appearances and family image, not repairing our relationship. My father's texts were more aggressive, demanding I stop this nonsense and warning my behavior was unacceptable. His attempts at intimidation were particularly absurd, as I'd been financially independent for years and didn't depend on them for anything. The wedding day arrived in June, and I spent it hiking with Jake, completely disconnected from the drama unfolding at the vineyard. We turned off our phones and enjoyed a peaceful day in nature, celebrating my freedom from toxic family dynamics rather than mourning my absence from Madison's perfect day. According to Aunt Carol, who attended, the day was everything Madison had dreamed of, except for the conspicuous absence of one family member. Multiple guests asked about my whereabouts, forcing my parents to invent explanations. My mother apparently told people I was sick. My father claimed work obligations. Madison told her friends I was jealous of her success and couldn't handle seeing her happiness. Each explanation revealed their inability to take responsibility for the situation they'd created. The aftermath of the wedding brought a new wave of contact attempts. My parents apparently realized that having guests ask about my absence was embarrassing and reflected poorly on them. Their concern wasn't about losing me as a daughter, but about managing their public image. My mother's post-wedding messages took on a different tone, mixing anger with desperation. She accused me of humiliating the family and demanded I explain my behavior to relatives. Her focus remained solely on how my choices affected them, never examining why I had made those choices. Summer passed peacefully, blessedly free of family drama. I received another promotion at work, started planning a vacation with Jake, and began seeing a therapist to process years of emotional neglect. For the first time in my adult life, my self-worth wasn't tied to gaining approval from people who would never give it. The silence from my family stretched through the summer and into early fall. I assumed they'd finally moved on, focusing on Madison's new marriage, continuing to pretend I'd never existed. The quiet was exactly what I'd hoped for when I made the decision to go no contact. Everything changed this past October when Madison's marriage began falling apart. According to Aunt Carol, Derek had been having an affair with a co-worker, and Madison discovered the infidelity just 4 months after her dream wedding. The perfect life my parents had celebrated so loudly was crumbling in spectacular fashion. Suddenly, my phone started ringing again. My mother left voicemails begging me to come home and support Madison through her difficult time. She claimed families should stick together during a crisis and accused me of being heartless for staying away when my sister needed me most. The hypocrisy was absolutely stunning. After years of being excluded from important family moments and conversations, they expected me to return immediately when Madison faced her first real challenge. They wanted me to provide emotional support for the sister who had called me jealous and dramatic just months earlier. My father's messages were more direct, demanding I stop punishing the family and return to help Madison through her divorce. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't rush home to support someone who had never supported me. The concept of consequences for their actions was completely foreign to him. Madison's messages were the most revealing. She called, sobbing, not to apologize for years of accepting preferential treatment, but to demand I come home and help her through her crisis. She expected immediate forgiveness and support without acknowledging any wrongdoing on her part, or our parents' part. Her voicemails painted her as the victim of both Derek's betrayal and my abandonment. She couldn't comprehend that my absence was a natural consequence of years of mistreatment, rather than a cruel punishment designed to hurt her during a vulnerable time. I maintained my silence through Madison's divorce proceedings, which apparently dragged on for months and dominated every family interaction. My parents spent thousands on legal fees, provided emotional support around the clock, and rearranged their lives to accommodate her needs. The contrast with how they'd handled my challenges over the years was stark. When I'd gone through a difficult breakup in college, I received a 5-minute phone call and advice to focus on my studies. When I'd struggled with job hunting after graduation, they'd suggested I lower my expectations. But Madison's crisis mobilized the entire family. My parents took time off work for court hearings, hired the best attorney, and provided a constant shoulder to cry on. The level of care and attention she received during her lowest point exceeded anything I'd ever experienced during my highest achievements. This past winter brought a new development that apparently sent my parents into complete panic mode. Madison decided to move back home during her divorce, returning to her childhood bedroom like she'd never left. But living with our parents as a divorced 24-year-old was not the comfort she'd expected. According to Aunt Carol, Madison was struggling with depression and anxiety. She'd lost her identity as Derek's wife and was having difficulty adjusting to single life. My parents were overwhelmed by her constant need for emotional support and practical assistance. For the first time in their lives, my parents were experiencing what it felt like to have a child who needed more than they could easily give. Madison's problems couldn't be solved with money or praise, and her emotional needs exceeded their capacity to provide comfort and solutions. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd spent decades giving Madison everything she wanted while ignoring my emotional needs. And now they were discovering how exhausting it could be to actually parent a struggling adult child. The golden child required more maintenance than they'd bargained for. My mother's messages from this period were desperate in a way I'd never heard before. She begged me to come home and help with Madison, claiming the family was falling apart without me. She suddenly seemed to realize that having 2 daughters might have been beneficial when one needed extensive support. Her pleas revealed a truth they'd never acknowledged. I had always been the stable, self-sufficient daughter who required minimal attention and resources. While they had been pouring all their energy into Madison, I'd been quietly building a successful life without their help or approval. This past spring brought the most shocking development of all. My mother showed up at my office building, having tracked down my workplace information from my LinkedIn profile. She waited in the lobby until my workday ended, ambushing me as I headed to my car. Seeing her after more than a year of no contact was jarring. She looked older, more tired, and genuinely distressed in a way I'd never witnessed. The confident woman who dismissed my feelings for decades now appeared vulnerable and uncertain. She begged me to talk, claiming she'd driven 6 hours from Ohio just for the chance to see me. Her desperation was palpable as she pleaded for 5 minutes of my time, explaining how much the family needed me. The woman who'd never seemed to notice my absence was suddenly claiming my presence was essential. I agreed to talk in a nearby coffee shop, curious about what could have driven her to such extreme measures. For the first time in my life, my mother was pursuing me rather than dismissing my concerns or redirecting attention to Madison. The conversation was unlike anything we'd ever had. My mother admitted that losing me had been devastating for the family, though she struggled to articulate exactly why. She claimed they'd all been lost without me, but couldn't explain what specific role I'd played. Her attempts at explanation revealed the depth of their denial. She insisted they'd always loved me equally, while simultaneously asking me to return home to help with Madison's problems. The blatant contradiction between claiming equal treatment and needing me specifically to manage her sister's crisis was completely lost on her. When I pointed out the years of favoritism and differential treatment, my mother became defensive, claiming I was misremembering or being overly sensitive. She acknowledged that Madison had received a little more attention, but insisted it was because she needed more help and guidance. The conversation confirmed everything I'd suspected about their complete lack of self-awareness. They genuinely believed their treatment had been fair and couldn't understand why I'd interpreted their actions as harmful. Their inability to acknowledge the reality of my childhood experience made reconciliation impossible. I explained to my mother that her visit to my workplace was inappropriate and that showing up unannounced wouldn't change my decision. I reiterated my boundary about no contact and asked her to respect my choice to build a life without them. Her response was telling. Instead of apologizing for crossing boundaries or acknowledging my right to make decisions about our relationship, she became angry and accused me of being stubborn and unforgiving. The conversation ended with her storming out of the coffee shop, frustrated that her ambush hadn't produced the desired results. This past summer, news came through Aunt Carol that Madison was finally moving out of my parents' house, attempting to rebuild her independent life. Apparently, living with our parents as an adult had been more challenging than she'd anticipated, and she was eager to reclaim her autonomy. My parents were reportedly relieved to have their house back, but also anxious about Madison's ability to manage on her own post-divorce. They'd grown accustomed to providing daily emotional support and were worried about her mental health without their constant presence. The situation perfectly illustrated the difference. I'd been expected to be independent from a young age, managing my own problems and emotions without parental intervention. But Madison, even in her 30s, was considered fragile and in need of constant protection and support. Fall brought a final attempt at contact from my father, who called and left a voicemail claiming he finally understood why I'd left the family. His message suggested he'd been reflecting on our relationship and recognized some mistakes in how they treated me. His voicemail was more thoughtful than anything I'd ever received from him, acknowledging they had given Madison more attention and resources while expecting me to be self-sufficient. He admitted their approach had been unfair and expressed regret about losing me as a daughter. However, his apology came with conditions. He asked me to forgive their mistakes and return to the family, claiming they'd learned from their errors and would treat me better in the future. The apology felt more like a negotiation tactic than genuine remorse. I didn't respond. Their sudden interest in fairness coincided suspiciously with Madison's move toward independence. They seemed to realize they needed a backup daughter, now that their primary child was rebuilding her own life and requiring less of their attention. The timing of their change of heart confirmed my decision to maintain no contact. Their desire for reconciliation wasn't motivated by genuine love or regret, but by practical concerns about family dynamics and their own needs for connection and purpose. Ending, winter marked 2 years since I'd first gone no contact, and I'd never been happier or more at peace with my decision. Jake and I are now engaged. I've received another promotion at work, and I've built a chosen family of friends who value and support me consistently. The contrast between my life without my biological family and my previous existence is stark. I no longer spend energy seeking approval, competing for attention that would never come, or feeling inadequate compared to someone who would always be the favorite. My therapy sessions helped me understand that their treatment was a reflection of their limitations, not my worth. I learned to separate my self-worth from their approval, and to recognize that healthy families don't operate with golden children and scapegoats. The final piece of information I received about my family came through Aunt Carol, who reported that my parents had apparently been asking extended family members about my current situation and whereabouts. Their inability to simply respect my boundaries and move on only confirmed the wisdom of my decision. They were asking relatives for any information about my life, but hadn't attempted to contact me directly after the workplace ambush. Perhaps they'd finally learned that confronting me would be counterproductive, or perhaps they were just waiting for another crisis that might require my assistance. Their continued attempts to gather information about me, rather than respecting my clearly stated boundaries, revealed their fundamental inability to understand consent and personal autonomy. Even after losing me as a daughter, they couldn't accept that I had the right to determine the terms of our relationship. Jake and I are planning our wedding now, creating a celebration that will be filled with people who genuinely love and support both of us. My parents won't be invited, not out of spite, but because they forfeited their right to participate in my important moments through years of indifference and neglect. The wedding planning has been joyful and stress-free, unlike the elaborate production my parents orchestrated for Madison's failed marriage. We're focusing on celebrating our love rather than impressing people or maintaining appearances, creating exactly the kind of authentic celebration I'd always dreamed having. Sometimes I wonder if my parents ever truly understood what they lost when I walked away. They spent so many years focused on Madison's needs and achievements that they never bothered to discover who I was or what I might contribute to their lives. Their frantic attempts to bring me back after Madison's crisis suggests they finally recognized that having two daughters might have been beneficial. But the realization came too late, and for all the wrong reasons, motivated by practical needs rather than genuine appreciation for my worth as a person. I've built a life filled with people who see my value, celebrate my achievements, and support me through challenges. The family I've chosen treats me with the respect and love that my biological family never provided, proving that blood relationships don't guarantee healthy dynamics. Looking back, I recognize that leaving was the best decision I ever made for my mental health and overall well-being. The years I spent trying to earn their love were wasted energy that I now invest in relationships that reciprocate my care and attention. My parents created the situation that led to losing me through decades of differential treatment and emotional neglect. Their shock and desperation when I finally left revealed how little they'd understood about the impact of their actions on my psychological development and self-worth. The golden child they'd invested everything in couldn't provide the stability and support they'd taken for granted from me. Madison's needs during her crisis exceeded their capacity to help, leaving them overwhelmed and desperate for the daughter they'd always ignored. But Madison, even in her mid-20s, still required more emotional and financial support than they'd anticipated when she was a perfect golden child. Their meltdown when I walked away was unbelievable because they'd never imagined I might have limits to my tolerance for mistreatment. They expected me to remain available indefinitely, accepting whatever scraps of attention they offered while watching them lavish love on my sister. But I finally learned that I deserve better than being an afterthought in my own family. Walking away was the most difficult and most necessary thing I ever did, and I've never regretted choosing my own well-being over their comfort and convenience. The family that crowned my sister as royalty, while treating me like nothing, discovered too late that the daughter they dismissed was the one who might have stood by them through anything. Their loss became my freedom. Call to action. What do you think about families like this? Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship, even with family, for your own peace? I really want to hear your thoughts in the comments below.